The National Survey on Drug Use indicated that 1 out of every 4 Americans admitted to using illegal drugs. That is a whopping 70 million people. And then in that same survey, it indicated that 48.7 million people were actually substance abusers. That is astonishing to say the least. Is there an answer? Is there a cause? We're going to discuss both in a segment that I have entitled The First Five. Welcome to Truths to Live By, and this is Juanita Price, and I have with me today someone I call a powerhouse. Her name is Joann Oliver. Joann Oliver is a evangelist, and she hails from actually Newark, New Jersey. At least that's where she was born and raised, and now she is in the Peach State of Georgia. And she is also a retiree, right, from the Newark Public Defender's Office. So hopefully we'll get to hear a little bit about that as it pertains to the topic if we get to it. But she is also the president and founder of Let Go and Let God Ministries, which is a ministry that specializes in counseling, healing, and liberating those who have been tormented by chemical, emotional, and physical addictions. And she has a message that is super simple, and it is no matter what your situation is, real help is available to you. Emphasis on real, and that real being God. And she believes that a person's success begins with at least these three things. And that is first, you have to admit that there is a problem. Secondly, believing that you need power greater than you to solve the problem, and she'll tell you who that is. And thirdly, she believes that you must turn your will and your life over to the care of God. When Evangelist Oliver is not hosting her annual addictions retreats or holding addictions meetings or facilitating workshops, she is also making surprise visits to evangelize. When she was definitely in New Jersey in the inner city crack houses, you'll also find her when not doing any of that, worshiping at her home church, which is Tabernacle of Jesus Ministries, where Apostle Douglas Anderson is the pastor. She is a compassionate hearted woman of faith. And I joke about this because it is true. I'll start by saying that all who hear her are inspired by her boldness and comforted by her down to earth, tell it like it is personality. She's a friend, a mentor, a sponsor, a shoulder to cry on still today, a spirit led teacher, a leader that's tried by fire. And this is the part that I often joke about it, but it is a truth. And that is this: if you want the whole truth and nothing but the truth, then you can call her. But if you want any other gospel and any other truth, call somebody else. Welcome, Evangelist Oliver. How are you?
I'm good, Reverend Price. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. So, of course, as you know, I am excited about us coming together to do this today. I think it is necessary. More than it is necessary, I think it is critical. And so, what we're going to be talking about today is a portion, at least, of what's known as the 12 steps program, except what we're going to be discussing are the first five. And so, how this came about, and you know this, but just as for our audience, is that it was just, I was in prayer one day and just talking to the Lord about some things, and I heard it so loud and clear in my spirit the first five. I didn't even know what the first five was until we started talking, and I believe that that gave birth to, our discussion for today, the first five. And so we're going to kind of start talking a little bit about that.
Mhm.
today. And so, is there anything that maybe that I haven't shared about you that you would want your audience to know? Or, and if not, we'll just kind of jump right in.
You kind of said it all.
I, mm-hmm.
The last part is the most important part. And like you said, we joke about that, but I am a person that tells the truth. I don't know how to do anything else. So if you don't want the truth, you have to call somebody else. It would be in your best interest to do that.
Right, right, right. And listen, I agree with you, right? It's no sense in spending plane fare or train fare or gas money, right, to bring me or you into any organization if they're not interested, in hearing the truths that we would like to share. If they want to hear, they want to call people to just sort of itch their ears, they're probably, especially as it relates to you, they need to call somebody else. But anyhow, we're going to jump into it then. So we're talking about addiction today. And for many, believe it or not, many in many churches or in many religious circles, even referring to the 12 steps is taboo and frowned upon, and many think that it's not biblical and things like that. Whenever someone says something is not biblical, to me, that even that statement needs to be unpacked a little bit further, right? And so, but I think that those that are maybe saying this are unaware that the 12 steps foundationally were inspired by scripture, right? And areas where the Lord is not mentioned, or it's expanded, to include, or words like higher power, that is to make it inclusive of those that are suffering addictions who may not believe or may have differing belief systems. It's just saying that this program, we want to help everybody, regardless of faith, right? But it is not to be confused with the fact that foundationally, all 12 were actually inspired by the scriptures. And am I right so far?
Yes. And the second step is the only step that talks about a higher power. Step 3, 7, and 11 talks about God. So after after step 2, you could be finished with a higher power, because now they realize you need a God of your understanding. And
Right.
hopefully that the name of that God is Jesus Christ. At least that's who he is for me.
Right. I love it. I love it. And so today we are actually going to discuss the first five. And so at the top, the step one basically says this: we admitted that we were powerless or are powerless over our addiction. Just fill in the blanks, right? Mine says alcohol, yours may say something else. But we admitted that we were powerless over our addiction and that our lives have become unmanageable. Right so far?
Yes.
Okay, so when you think of step one, and we kind of talked beforehand about this, I see three words that are so essential, right, in step one. It's
Mm-hmm.
the word admit, the word
Mm-hmm.
unmanageable, and the word
Mm-hmm.
powerless. So,
Mm-hmm.
can you talk a little bit about, first of all, we need to admit that we're powerless? Like, why admit that?
Well, because if you don't admit that you're powerless, you'll believe that you're not. There are a lot of people who still have their wives, still have their house, still have their jobs, never been to jail yet. Um, and so they believe that their lives is still manageable.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
they don't have to admit anything, because they when they got all that still going on, they're not unmanageable. So why should I have to admit that? I'm still working. I'm still bringing in the money. I'm still paying the rent. I'm still giving my wife or my husband what I'm supposed to give them.
Right. And so when you were talking, the thing that came to mind for me is the fact that it's an addiction, period. To me, the fact that it is an addiction says that you're powerless, right? Because if you had the power, right, it would not have developed to the stage of addiction, right?
Right. But there are two type of people. There's one set that has hit their own personal bottom.
Hmm.
Those people will admit, not only will they admit that they are powerless, they will admit to the dysfunctional behavior. That's also dealing with step one. And they will admit that their lives have become unmanageable because um, they'll see they lost the wife, they lost the house, they lost the kids, they been in jail,
Hmm.
they've been in mental hospitals.
Hmm.
All of those things say I have hit a bottom.
That's
And
right.
some and a lot of times when we're talking about bottoms, you have to hit your own personal bottom. I could have somebody in my family, Reverend Price, who I know for a fact that I'm looking at your bottom,
Hmm.
right? And they don't believe they hit a bottom. So that's my bottom for them.
Hmm.
But everybody has to reach their own bottom. And the saddest thing is the, sometime your bottom could be death.
Wow. Wow. Y-
Yes.
you make me think about this. I think about when you talk about a personal bottom, immediately what comes to mind are the codependents, those that are codependents, meaning they're the ones that enable the addicted person. And so what many times pulls codependents in is because what they are looking at they view as the person's bottom, but
Mm-hmm.
it's what they consider a bottom to in their view. So to give you an example, and I'll give you a personal even example. I've helped, let's say, someone that was homeless, right? Thinking that, if you were to furnish a home for them and take care of them and so forth, they might be motivated, right, to do something different about their lives, to where they're going to be put in a position where they're no longer homeless, right? Only to find out that I'm just the biggest enabler, that their
Mm-hmm.
behaviors have not only not changed but have worsened, because really homelessness is not all that bad to them.
Right.
It's nice that they're living in my home, but
Right.
homelessness is not a thing for them, and they're not going to be more responsible. You want to jump in, but go ahead.
So, and the other thing is okay, so you supplied the house. That's good because that's more drugs and more alcohol that's in my pocket that I can use with it. You got me? Like,
Wow.
so I don't have to pay rent. And because you family, you probably might charge me 50 when that's not real rent in the real world.
Right, right,
So now
right.
I got more money. So now I'm killing myself
Mhm.
quicker. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Because I got
Mhm.
more money.
Right, right, absolutely. So I'm really seeing this, and I think that there should be emphasis on this, and especially for those that reach out to help someone and they're actually doing all the work, but the person that is in the dysfunction, that is suffering the addiction, they're really carrying them. But that person's behaviors, addictive mindset, addictive behaviors have not changed, and they're doing all the work. And I think what I'm hearing you saying is, I'm doing this, one, because you care about them, but two is that when you look at when you're on the outside looking in, this looks horrible to you, and oh, this person must be at a place where they want to do something different, about their lives. And I think what you're really saying is no, from their view, from the view of the addicted person,
Mhm.
they have to see their state, their dysfunction,
Absolutely.
that this is their bottom. And they have to come to that place where they admit, not me admit for them, but they
Absolutely.
admit that they're what? That they're powerless over their addiction and that their lives have become unmanageable.
Unmanageable. Right. Do you what the addictive person does, right?
Hmm.
And the reason why it takes them a long time is to see they bottom because we always find somebody worse than us.
Ooh.
And that's what we look at. We don't
Hmm.
look at, oh, it's time for me to go into a rehab and it's time for me to get my life together. I'm saying this guy's standing by a barrel with fire coming out of it, with a bottle in his hand. I'm not that. I go to my house. I still pay my rent.
Hmm.
My rent only $61. I pay my rent.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
when I get as bad as him, then you could call me an alcoholic,
Yes, yes.
which is
Wow.
not which is not even true. Um, what people don't talk about much with step one that we should talk about is the dysfunctional behavior.
Hmm.
A lot of times we come in and we work step one, two, and three, which qualifies us to be new. We knew when you first come into a rehab, you work in step one, two, and three, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Never dealt with the behavior. Matter of fact, you can work every step and the behavior come last, or the behavior that the addict can recognize. Because
Hmm.
everybody else recognized the behavior. You just didn't think it was that bad.
Right.
It's like you deal with denial, you
Hmm.
deal with refusal. I call it refusal because a lot of times I'm not in denial. I'm just refusing that it's as bad as it is.
Yeah.
Because if you convince me it's as bad as it is, guess
Hmm.
what? I got to do something about it. And I ain't ready
Yeah.
to do nothing about it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
understood what I said, right?
Right. Right.
You know what I'm saying? Even in your conversation,
Hmm.
like, I used to feel like that, but if I didn't say the word right or if I didn't say it in the correct sentence, my smart mouth would say, you understood what I said, right?
Hmm.
You can't even get that's so ugly. You can't even get me to say that today.
Right.
But these are the behaviors. And let me tell you, so when we say that a lot of people don't want to talk about scripture with this is the foundation. And um I do want to talk about this particular scripture. Um the scripture that deals with step one is Romans 7:18, right? But I want to talk about Galatians 5:19-21, and it deals with dysfunctional behavior.
Hmm.
That's any and all behaviors considered out of the will of God according to the Bible. So when we talk about in the book of Galatians 5 5:19-21, just in
Hmm.
case you don't know
Hmm.
um what are the behaviors, it say when we follow the desire of our sinful nature, you live your lives will produce these evil results:
Hmm.
sexual immortality,
Morality.
impure
Hmm.
thoughts,
Hmm.
lustful pleasure, idolatry, participating in demonic activity,
Hmm.
hostility, quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, self-ambition, division, the feeling that the feeling that everyone is wrong except you.
Wow. Wow.
Those that's in your little group, drunkenness, wild parties, and other kinds of sin, which we will continue to really call out in the step work. These are all the things that the dysfunctional behavior is talking about.
Right. That it
But
refers to,
these
yeah.
are the things that we deal with so long because it takes us so long to just admit, to look at ourselves. Because believe me, we always looking at somebody else.
Right,
The
right.
hardest thing is to look at ourselves.
Right. And that word admit is simply to confess that it's true.
Yes.
And
Yes.
sometimes, and it's interesting that part of the
Mm-hmm.
definition of admit, it indicates that sometimes it's with reluctance that you do it,
Right.
right? You know, you have a
Right.
hard time, you
Right.
know, it's a confession that sometimes we're reluctant to do, but we surrender and admit that this
Mm-hmm.
thing is true, that whatever it is
Right.
that I'm admitting to is actually true. So
Right.
now I want to deal with the word powerless, right? Because we're
Powerlessness.
admitting that we were
Mm-hmm.
that we're powerless over. Can you talk about that? Like, I'm an addict, right? And I'm saying,
Right.
no, I can stop anytime, you know. And of course, that's another thing right there. But that word powerless is also a powerful word, and especially when
Mm-hmm.
someone arrives at the conclusion that I am powerless. Just can you talk about being powerless?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean you're
That's
powerless over your
that's
addiction?
the hardest thing
Mm,
to do
right.
because most people don't even want to believe that they're
Mm-hmm.
powerless
Right.
because they want to feel like they in control, they got some power, they could do it.
Yeah.
I could stop. And
Mm-hmm.
listen, a lot of people can stop. They just can't stay stopped.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so when you talk about the powerlessness, you got to see that as a result of the I'm powerless. I can't mess with this.
Mm-hmm.
This has so much power. When I do drugs, when I get high, this is what happens to me.
Right. Right.
It's even in everything that I do
Right. Right.
that just mess up. So I have to say to myself, listen, I don't have no power over these drugs and this alcohol. And so I just need to leave it alone. But I must confess that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people have a hard time because not only the powerlessness, they don't even want to admit it. Well, I'm not going to admit that. I just drink and the court sent me here.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't get through this first step right here, you might as well close the book because there's nothing else you
Yeah.
could do.
Yeah.
There's nothing else. And also dealing with the first step, and this do take a while. We have to allow God, even in the first and the second step, both of them, to change our mind
Mm-hmm.
because my mind is addictive.
Mm-hmm.
Like even if it ain't drugs for me today, it could be something else. Got to be very very careful because whatever I like a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
Even food, when it came to me, I like rice, I like spaghetti, and I eat a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll make it for a week because I like it.
Right.
You got me? Who eats spaghetti for a week?
Yeah.
Like,
Something.
I'm just saying, whatever you like,
Mm-hmm.
you could do too much of.
Right. Right. It was something that I was thinking about. Um, and I've heard you talk about this even in the past, you know, when it comes to even this idea of powerlessness. I think of a lot of times the consequences, you know, associated with addiction that the addicted person is fully aware of. And you've spoken to this in the past, and you said that the first thing you got to admit is that you love whatever your addiction is. And I
Mm-hmm,
think you've
mm-hmm.
mentioned that, but you don't love what you've got to do to possibly get it, or you don't love the
Yeah, right,
consequences. Would
right.
you say that's a part of the admission as well that we've got to really fully
Absolutely.
admit.
Absolutely, because there's a lot of things that you got to do that you don't want to do
Mm-hmm.
to get what it is that you want, right? You don't, there's so many humiliating things that people do to
Yeah.
get the drugs.
Yeah.
You like the ideal that you can go and get them, but you don't love what you got to do to get them.
You gotta get it
It
to do
takes
it.
a long time. And then it's shame and all that stuff come as a part of all that stuff that
Mm-hmm.
you have done
Right.
just in the namesake of getting high, of
Sure.
getting
Sure.
drugs, of getting a bottle of alcohol. I know this girl who, and she's my friend, so I won't say names, but she slept with this old man,
Mm-hmm.
and he was blind in one eye. She was scared of how he looked,
Mm-hmm.
but she slept with him just to get $20 to get a
Wow.
bag of dope.
Right. Right. Yeah. 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 Ooh.
And that's my best friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
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 these
and
are the things that
yeah.
people go through. You'd be
Yeah.
surprised.
And see, you work for the public defender's office. You're retired now, so I'm
Yes.
guessing it's okay to kind of talk
Oh,
without
you can say,
names and
yeah.
things like
Mm-hmm.
that. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
are there things that you can share, right, that you
Mm-hmm.
saw coming through there that was definitely associated with drug addiction?
Shoot, I seen a whole
Look,
lot of things. Look, I seen guys molesting little girls because they was high.
wow.
Because they was high.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people say because they was high, but you there are times that it those things happen to them. They
Mm-hmm.
never dealt with it,
Mm-hmm.
so they'll do it
Mm-hmm.
eventually. If you never dealt with an unresolved issue,
Mm-hmm.
most likely you'll be doing it too.
Drugs gonna bring it out. The addiction's definitely gonna bring it
Absolutely.
out.
And that's
Right.
what happened
Right.
to this one guy. I've seen people as a result of burglaries, stealing cars, and all that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
stripping cars. All that was for money to get high.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was so bad in the courts that they now have what's called drug court.
Right.
They have to mandate the person, and that's the other thing, mandate the person to go to AA or NA for 90 days, and then they'll dismiss their case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means that they never should have been in jail because it ain't even worth it. It was a low charge.
Right.
But most of these people are not serious about getting their lives together. They doing it because the court telling
Mandated.
them that they had to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they come once they 90 days up, they come back to drug court, they dismiss the charges, then go back out and use like that.
Again.
Or go
Wow.
back out
Wow.
and steal, like people that steal in stores and sell the
Mm-hmm.
clothes and stuff. Most of them are drug addicts.
Right. 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 You actually, this is a nice segue into number two, into step two,
Insanity.
and that is insanity. You just described it. Okay, so number two
Mm-hmm.
says, and hold your thought because I don't want you to forget what
Okay.
you were saying. I'm just going to say it so that you
We go.
can yeah,
Mm-hmm.
right. So we can kind of roll right into that. So number
Mm-hmm.
two
Mm-hmm.
says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Now, what were you going to share about that?
Well, I was going to share something else, but we can go right into step two. So, step two, right? There are two parts in step two.
Mm-hmm.
Came to believe that a power greater than myself. And then he could restore me to sanity. Now, when we talk about being restored to sanity, that means somewhere I was insane,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the definition for
Insanity.
insanity is doing the same things over and over, expecting different results every time.
Wow. Wow.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if I keep going the shoplift, selling the merchandise, and then going to get the drugs, and every time I go in to steal some clothes, I'm not necessarily coming out of the
Mm-hmm.
store. There might be 3 or 4 times I have to go to jail for that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
insanity.
Right. Right.
But the root of all that
Mm-hmm.
is my addiction,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
And step 2 is all about faith, trust, and believing.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to say this because people will be like, I believe in me. Nope, not believing in you. It's always been too much about you. Believing in a power greater than yourself.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that power we're talking about today is the
Is
Lord
Jesus
Jesus Christ.
Christ.
Right.
Now there's a lot of powers people think is greater than them,
Mm-hmm.
but use wisdom and knowledge in this area because you cannot have a pencil as your higher power.
Right.
They
Right.
tried to convince me of that.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't make sense to me
Right.
because if I break a pencil, it has no more power.
Come on
Even
now.
to use it for what it's supposed to be used for until I sharpen it again.
Right. Right. And those listening might think of that as ludicrous that that would be suggested. And I think that what's also kind of flawed in that is that the person is sort of uh, picking this power, right, without really truly the use of right reasoning. I mean, again, what power does a pencil have? It has no power in and of itself. In fact, even its ability to write, right, is only put to use by, again, your hands, right? You picking it up, making sure that it's sharpened and then using it. So it still requires, an external source
Right.
that has intelligence. So you having intelligence is a higher power than the pencil. The pencil's a
Mm-hmm.
resource, but that needs you, in order for it to function. But that's not so with God.
Absolutely. And the other thing, even with people, you could use people use people as their higher power, but people cannot restore you back to sanity. The
Mm-mm-mm.
same people that we're using are the same people who God has delivered,
Right, right.
but they cannot yet. I don't care where they at. They only can help you. They can't restore your mind
Mm-hmm.
back to sanity. They can't.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. They would have to have the power of God. And then in that case, they would be what we call conduits, meaning
Right.
vessels through whom
That
God,
he
or portals
used.
through
Right.
whom God uses. So it's God
Mm-hmm.
that restores to sanity. That's
And
powerful.
but still,
Hmm.
even Reverend Price, think about it. Still, even a person like God uses you all the time, right?
Hmm.
But you always point the person to God. You say,
To Him.
listen, God
Yes.
only uses me to help you, but it's God.
It's God. God. I'm just a
Yes.
vessel. I'm just a vessel.
Yes.
Yeah, that step two is powerless. And I mean, it's powerful
Powerful.
because it
Mhm.
says that you have to come to believe that. Notice
That's
that a
right.
lot of work has
Come.
to happen in the conscience, in the belief system,
Mhm.
that has to change. You were saying
Right.
something early about an addictive mind, and it made me think about this, about how many years it even takes. Like, even if a person has they've done step one, they've done step two, let's just say they now are free from the acts, ACTS, or the
Mm-hmm.
actions of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean necessarily that they cease to have an addictive mind. And just from a physiological point of view, it takes years even for the brain, you follow, to sort of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
reset, or reset, or whatever word we want to apply there, to a brain that is now functioning in a healthy way, to because you can, like, and I've heard you say, you can start, you can stop, you
All
can
the time.
start, you can stop,
Right.
but it takes years, for this
Right.
mind, this
Right.
brain to kind of reset. And if the Lord is not the power that you've turned, you come to believe, right, that you need, you very well could be someone who just stopped, but are very much still an addict,
Mm-hmm.
in the brain. And then how long, I know maybe you could shine on this better, but I know that I've
Yeah.
known of people that have stopped for sometimes years, and then all of a sudden, it was just one time and they were full on
Right.
addiction,
Right.
again.
Right.
Yeah.
They say one, and this is hard for people to understand. One is too many, and 1,000 is not enough.
Whew, I get
And
that.
so what that means is
Hmm.
it's the first one. And once you start, you going. You can go to 1,000. It's still not enough.
Hmm.
So if you never pick up the first one,
Hmm.
you don't have to kind of worry. You don't want to set yourself up to do that.
Right, right, right. Wow, wow, wow. I want to touch on something too. You've often
Mhm.
said this, and it's almost in the same vein of an addicted mind. So let's say my addiction is smoking, right? So I now have put down cigarettes,
Mhm.
but my mind is still addicted. So now I've put down cigarettes, and so now what am I doing? I'm now eating,
One
right?
addiction feeds
And
another.
you've often said one addiction feeds another. And then in my mind,
Always.
when as long as that mind is addicted, it serves as just almost like a gateway for other addictions to form. Even though you're putting down one, you're constantly picking up others.
Right.
And so,
When I when I stopped using, right?
mhm,
Um, when I stopped using drugs and alcohol, right? I had to go through other things. So I was like, there's no way I'm giving up cigarettes. They took my drug, they took the alcohol. I ain't doing none of that.
mhm,
I had to um give up the cigarettes.
mhm,
After I gave up the cigarettes, I had to give up
mhm.
the men. And
Say
when
that
I
again.
say that, I
Y-
say I had to give up the men.
The men.
And
Okay.
when I say that is when I was addictive, you're not in your right mind when you're addictive. You're just not. You
Right.
crazy, you insane. I used to feel like I always supposed to have two men.
Wow.
So when one act up, I have that's addictive personality. My mind needed to be changed.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so somewhere, even and I'm talking about at that time, I had about 18 years clean, not
Wow.
using, not
Wow.
using drugs, not using
Mhm.
alcohol, not smoking cigarettes, but still had the men, you know.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So
Wow.
if what happens with that though is you find out down the years that there's something else you need to give up
Yes. Wow.
because your mind your mind is addictive, your life is addictive. One addiction feed another. And it's like it just clicked to you. It just clicked to you. You
Mm-hmm.
know, here's
Mm-hmm.
one, here's another one. The
Right,
only
right.
thing I didn't ever get addicted to was clothes.
What's called?
Everything else I was addicted.
Right,
Everything else I
right,
was addicted. And I had to be careful.
right, right. Because you don't want to get put down one, right, only to keep picking up others. And like you said, and especially what was at the, now this is interesting because we didn't really talk about that and we don't have to if you don't want to, but
Mhm.
something's at the root of addiction, especially where you put down, right? Because I don't want to, I'm using the word, I don't want to use the word free, right? Because I
Mhm.
don't know that you're free just because you stopped, right?
You're not for
And
right.
especially where you put down and then you pick up another, and
Mhm.
I think that there, and you could tell me if I'm wrong, that I think that there's something at the root, right? Yeah, we have to get to the root, and that's probably further down into the
Mhm.
steps too,
Mhm.
but that you have to get to the root because like you said, you stopped the chemical addiction, right? But then there was another addiction, and that addiction was sex, or as you
Right.
would call it,
Absolutely.
men, men.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
something's at the root. Would you agree to many of our
Abs-
addictions? And it's not just as simple
a-
as I just want to party,
absolutely.
you know.
Absolutely. So you could write that question down.
Hmm.
Two, I'm going to touch on this very little because that's
We're
step
gonna
four.
deal with it later, right?
Right. That's step four. But if you don't get the root of the thing, let me tell you, I had so much stuff going on. I had anger, I had disappointment, I had unforgiveness, not forgiving people. I had all this stuff. I had people molesting me at a young age. I had people not believing me in the mental hospital, all this kind of stuff, right?
Wow,
And
wow.
so what I kept doing is I kept picking off. Let's look at it as a tree. I was picking off the anger. I was picking off the forgiveness. Nah, I want to keep that because I deserve that. I'm picking off the what whatever the issue was, right? And somewhere I heard the spirit of the Lord say, if you pick it up from the root, you're gonna take the whole tree. So I had
Yes.
so it wasn't, I was angry and all that, but it wasn't, I thought it was anger. It was not anger, right?
Right, right.
So I did a fourth step like it was anger, but then it
It
still was
wasn't.
there. It wasn't
Mhm.
anger, it was unforgiveness.
Yes, yes, and I wanna
So
part.
once I dealt with the
Hmm.
unforgiveness, the whole
Right,
tree came up. So I didn't have to pick and do this.
right,
Everything
right,
comes up.
right. And on anger, and you know this because we teach it in the counseling classes, is that
Mhm.
anger is not a primary emotion anyway. It's not the
Right, right,
primary emotion. There is something, there's another emotion, there's something else rather underneath the
that's the
anger.
first.
Because there's a
Right,
reason for the
mhm.
anger. It's just not just anger
Right,
for just to be anger, but there's
right.
actually, it's actually, I'm sorry, anger is a secondary emotion. There's something
Secondary. Mhm.
primary, right, that is the root cause
Mhm.
of the emotion. And you've just pulled it out. You said it was unforgiveness. And you said earlier, I think you called it forgiveness, but I think you meant
Right,
unforgiveness
unforgiveness.
was
Right,
on your tree and you was like, nope, I'm not plucking that out because I feel like I
right.
deserve to keep that and you
I
deserve to
deserve to be
keep it.
mad.
And listen,
Well, what happened
exactly,
to me?
exactly. And there are many who feel that they are justified to hold on to the
Mhm.
unforgiveness, right?
Mhm.
Because of having been violated, disappointed, hurt, whatever. But what it's doing, though, is it's also imprisoning you, right, to that very reason that you are not forgiving, right?
Right.
And not only with
And
everything else that goes with it. It's also imprisoning you to the
right.
anger and to the sex, to the whatever. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because even though we kind of talking about the fourth step, it's still talking about insanity. You know why? Because I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I had a right.
Mm-hmm.
I had a right to not forgive somebody for hurting me. I had a
Mm-hmm.
right not, but let me say this though. at least say what you really feel. Because guess what?
Yes, yes,
Somebody can help you.
yes,
If you're
yes.
honest, even if it don't make sense. Like I ain't letting go of that forgiveness. I told them that down the years. And
Mm-hmm.
you, Reverend Price, I told you I wasn't going to do it. But as the time went on, the Lord began to deal with me. Y'all begin to pray for me. Um, and what happened, even though I didn't want to get rid of it, then the word said, if you don't forgive them, I ain't
Mm-hmm.
forgiving you.
Right,
I was like,
right.
wait a minute now, because I do too much
Mm-hmm.
for the Lord to not forgive me. So I need to forgive them.
Right,
And so I
sure,
started
sure.
seeing it different as the Lord started dealing with the craziness, the insanity. And guess what he started doing? Changing my mind.
Yes,
And some of that
yes.
happened in spite of me giving permission. That's what I love.
Wow. That's powerful. That's really, really powerful. Wow, 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 wow. Whew.
Mhm.
So anger, lingering anger is toxic.
Right.
Unforgiveness is toxic. Really anything that we turn to avoid facing and confronting what has
Yes.
happened to us, what is hurting us,
Yes.
right? And even the stubborn belief system, you follow, is going to be toxic to us,
Absolutely.
right? So now,
Absolutely.
so we this topic right here, step two can be like its own segment, right? But we're gonna move
Yes.
on to
Yes.
step three
But
because, but
can we
sure.
just say what step two is? So step two is about faith, trust, and believing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's from God. Believing that
Mm-hmm.
whatever insanity that's turned into sanity is God. Remember, faith isn't earned, it's a gift. And faith is not an option, it's a must. In this step is a must. And what happens in step two, we have to acknowledge the seed of faith that
Mm-hmm.
God has given us. So what he does is, even though people don't have faith yet, work in
Mm-hmm.
step two, as we talk to them about God, God is
Mm-hmm.
planting the seed of faith.
Yes.
But when you come to the next one, we'll talk about that.
Okay, so powerful. So now we're on to step three, right? I can't even believe we've been going and time's a ticking, right? But I'm
Yes,
thrilled about
I'm
this, and
loving
I believe that somebody watching this is going to be free. I really do.
it.
You know, and
Amen.
so if you're listening, just hang in, hang in, hang in. So we're gonna
Yes.
move on to step three. Step three says that I made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. And I was going to end with as we understood him, but I'm going to
Right.
end there. But I'm going to repeat, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. Go ahead. You
Right.
looking like finish one
So,
as we understood.
so, yes, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. I'm gonna have to say, as we understood them,
Go ahead.
because everybody, remember, we're talking, when you're talking about step one, two, and three, very, very new people. So they're not gonna understand God
The
like
way,
you.
right.
And we don't want to put that on them. We want them to build their own relationship
Absolutely.
with God, right?
Absolutely.
And the new person should not understand God like us anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying they just coming in
Clear,
and we've
clear.
been here for 30 years.
Right.
So um this step, you have to make a decision that you want to turn your life over to God. Now, but let's realize this. Do you see this step three? It's not saying turn your life over to the care of a higher power. It says
Right. You
God.
made it clear. Right. It's made
God.
clear who the higher power
It
is.
doesn't say
Right.
a higher power. It say
Right.
God. This
Right.
is the first
Right.
step that talks about God.
Right. Absolutely.
Now,
Yeah.
I would say this. If you have not done step 1 and step 2 thoroughly, you will not be able to do step 3.
Mm.
Okay? Especially if in step 2 you have not came to believe that a power greater than you could restore you to sanity. Some people stay stuck because they don't want to believe that the things that they did was insane.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So now I'm going to personally make a decision and
Mm-hmm.
say, God, I'm going to just turn everything over to you. And I believe that you're going to help me. It's not nothing deep here because remember, it's
Mm-hmm.
new people.
Sure. Sure.
So, and I believe you're going to help me because I know you help me. I don't even think that bad or that insane like I used to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I thank you for bringing me back to being sane, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now I need to turn my life over to you. Now, understanding step 3 is just the decision making. You have to make this decision. Nobody can make this one for you,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
This is important. Step 3 is the center of all steps. You know why? Because this step requires your complete faith. You
Mm-hmm.
have
Mm-hmm.
to have faith
Right.
for this
Right.
step
Right.
because you got to believe that God is and that he he will help you through this.
Sure.
I'm turning my life over to you.
Right.
I don't want to, and the reason I gotta turn my life over to you is because I don't want to drink again. I don't want to drug again. I don't want to have an addictive personality. I'm sick of being angry. I'm just sick and tired of myself right
Right.
here. So
Right.
God, can you help me?
Okay. So,
So we literally ask God to control us,
mm-hmm.
to take the control, because we also like to control our lives. So this step helps us to say, God, please take control and your will be done. I don't understand how that's going to be, but because I'm
Mm-hmm.
telling you, this is the way I understand it. So
Mm-hmm.
God, please help me.
Right. So, I actually, just for the sake of, like you mentioned, the new people, people that may not understand
Mhm.
terms and terminology. So, with
Right.
step 3 saying, made a decision to turn our will, right, and our
Mm-hmm.
lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. The word will, okay, it means a lot of things. And so when we look at the word will, it is referring to our preference, right? Because I must now prefer God's way over my way,
Mm-hmm.
right? God's
Mm-hmm.
desire over my
Right.
desire. It
Right.
also refers to that part of us that triggers us to act, right?
Right.
Like when you really think about
Right.
it, and I think you mentioned this one very important word that the will speaks to is control, our control. So
Yes.
you're also,
Yes.
in turning your will over, you're actually taking your hands off, right? And you're
That's it.
releasing and
Yep.
relinquishing your control. And you're saying, God, I want you to drive. God, I want
Mm-hmm.
you to be the one in control. So once again, it's speaking about my preference.
Yes.
I'm letting go of my preference, right? And I'm replacing it with what God prefers. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
releasing my control, right? And by turning over my will, I'm turning over all of my triggers. I'm no longer going to be triggered
Yes.
by my way,
Mm-hmm.
right? I want
And
to be triggered
that's
by
right.
yours. I want you to lead,
Yes.
and which is simply means to be
Yes.
Lord. So
Right.
I thought
Over
we
my life.
we wanted to
Right.
emphasize that for the folks that don't understand what do you mean by will, right?
Right.
So
That
yeah, I
was
wanted to share that.
excellent.
Yeah, I want to share that.
The other thing is I really want people to understand that step 3, right,
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
the center of all steps.
The
Like
center.
this
Mm-hmm.
step, if you
Mm-hmm.
get this step, you'll be
Mm-hmm.
able to go through.
Mm-hmm.
right? Because this requires our complete faith. And let me show you something. So Hebrews 11:6 said, and without faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is
Mm-hmm.
impossible to please God because anyone that comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
So what if, like you said, Reverend Price, if we just, God, please just take me out of it, my control issues. Just
Mm-hmm.
I'm just dependent on you.
Right.
I don't
Right.
even know how to do that, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
dependent on you.
Right.
My way
Right.
didn't work.
Right.
My way almost killed me.
Right. Right.
So I know your way for my life is better.
Yeah, yeah, and it's this is really key for those people that have trust issues, and that
Yes.
are control freaks. Like really do
Mhm.
have to start at one. You really have to admit that the reason why we are at step
Absolutely.
three is that, listen, I'm powerless. And
Mhm.
if I keep running my life, if I keep controlling my life, I am doomed to self-destruct. I'm
That's
doomed.
it.
I'm doomed.
Yep.
So it keeps flipping me back to those first two steps, and even why you have
Yes.
emphasized that it's got to start here, and
You
in
gotta.
that sequence, in that order,
Yes.
to reach
Yes.
number three. So,
Yes.
but look, so
Yeah.
this is a good stopping point. I know we could listen, we could
That's it.
split these
Yeah.
up sort of one by one,
Mm-hmm.
and they would be
Mm-hmm.
their own segment. But I think this is a good
Right.
stopping point because we're not done, okay? But this is
Mm-hmm.
definitely, we've reached the end of this segment, and we're so blessed, Sister Joann, we are so blessed to
Thank you.
have you with us. And I know I'm excited. And so I know that someone out there that is really struggling in this area, there's somebody out there
Yes.
right now who is saying, you know what, I can't even see my life in any different way. And look at who God has sent our way in you today. You're not only somebody who has been through this, but you've worked well over the last 20 years or so with people who had that same mindset. We only touched on some things, but I know you could tell us some real horror stories and some people whose lives truly were
Yes.
ashes, ashes, practically ashes, if not ashes. And you've seen God give them beauty, in place of
Yes.
ashes. So
Ashes. Yes.
we're gonna bring you back um, for part two of this segment where we cover steps 4 and 5. So stay tuned if you are listening. And Sister Joanne, God bless you and thank you once
God bless
again.
you, Reverend Price.